What's up, Internet? The GM elected to not tell any of his players when the session start time is. So nobody's here. So session's canceled. And we're all very confused. Because he just refused to give us the answer. And he said we had to solve the puzzle to get the start time. But like, we just wanted to play. It's weird. Also, he's disappeared. And I think part of the puzzle is also finding him. So, we'll...
It's a bad time to bring up that I've shipped all.
You've shipped?
Chipped? Like a dog?
Chipped? Oh. No, it's probably a good time to mention it.
Okay.
If we can find the GM, that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
He's probably going to get
the back
mad.
of your neck itches, by the way. Just don't worry about it.
He's probably going to get mad at you for having meta knowledge, though.
Nah, it's fine.
Welcome back, Internet. We return. I am here. Isaiah is here.
Yeah.
And I had a last minute change of topic plan, so this might be a little rambling all over the place, but you know what? We're gonna go with it. I think I mostly got my concept straight. So what are we talking about here? Kind of as an extension to what Isaiah did with the previous episode, or episode before? Which one? Oh no.
Last episode.
Yeah, last episode. About the whole idea of like a secondary objective and like making combat more engages by having those secondary objectives going on. Some of that was an idea that I had about what I wanted to talk to, but he didn't quite hit on one particular element of that I had a thought about. So we're going to talk about that specific element, and it's the idea of player knowledge and how much or how little to deliver to your players as the GM. It kind of ties into the idea of metagaming. It kind of ties into the idea of like pace. It kind of touches a lot of things, because ultimately the way the hobby works is you exchange information back and forth from one end of the table to the other end of the table. So like it touches a little bit of everything, but it's the idea of like, how do you balance how much the players know and or should know as or how much do you give the players as the GM, and how much should you give them or not give them, and different ways to handle that problem, and if it will become a problem. And yeah, like I said, this touches a lot of different things. I'm kind of focusing on 3-4 main areas, but it touches on almost every element of the game if you keep teasing it out. So I tried not to, but yeah.
I think this is also a pretty necessary episode. I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with, especially newer GMs, when the question of like, you know, this is the why you should always start things en medias res, right? Because you sort of need that, or you need to understand how much knowledge to give the players about their current situation so they have the tools that they need to make the decisions that you ultimately want them to make.
Yeah, it's definitely a new GM. It could be a new GM struggle because, well, we'll get into it. But I do think even when you become really experienced, this is still one of those things that you're going to have to constantly reevaluate over and over and over again, which I've tended to notice that I think some people have a mentality when it comes to GMing. I mean, this probably applies to other things, but, you know, staying within our wheelhouse. When it comes to GMing, I think a lot of people have this mentality that if they learned something once or did something the one time, then they're good. In the sense of like, oh, I watched a video from Ginny D or from the Dungeon Dudes or from, you know, Matt Colville that told me, you know, not to railroad my players, and I absorbed that information, so now I'm good. I'm not going to do the railroading thing. But really, the way it actually works is you have to readdress your knowledge on the thing over and over and over again to actually get good at it, right? So you might know in the back of your head that you don't want to be overly railroady, but you might fall into that bad habit if you don't check in on yourself over and over again about making sure to not do it, right? So this particular problem of how much information am I giving my players, or should I be giving my players, is a very similar thing where you might be like, oh, I'm going to do it this way. But if you don't keep checking in on how you're doing it as a campaign is going on, you could very easily slip into a direction you don't want to. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Yeah. It's the, oh, God damn it. What was this? All right. Never mind. My brain died. Just the idea that you have to keep reassessing your thought process on a thing because it's very easy to get stuck in a loop of behavior. Once you're in that loop, it's hard to break out of it. So if you can sort of maintain your consistent reassessment of your skills or the situation in which you need them for, the better, right? Like to sort of play this out, people are like, oh, you should never railroad your players. But as we've talked about on this podcast, railroading is not always a bad thing. So if you go, oh, okay, well, I railroaded my players in this one situation and it actually went to our benefit, you might not realize that you're doing it more and more and more and more, and now the players have no agency. You have to check that.
Yeah, basically it's easy to slip into a bad habit.
Yes,
is kind of especially if the bad habit feels like gratifying in the short term, right? Like, if you railroad your players and it works in a certain kind of way, and you're like, oh, that worked, and then you do it again, and then you keep doing it, and you're like, oh, now we've gone too far the other way. Like, yeah. So yeah, and if exactly what I mean for this is not 100% clear, it will start to become clear, I think, as I start to explain it out a little more. All that being said, before we get rolling, please take a moment and hit subscribe or follow on your podcast platform of choice. And if you would like to leave a donation to our editor, you can find the link in the description. That'd be nice. Please and thank you.
I think at some point we should have Brett say something just so people know that he's still alive.
He is still alive, we promise. Because here's the thing. Here's how you know he's alive. If Brett dies, we die. We go with him. The episodes go bye-bye.
It just ceases.
It ceases to exist. Yeah. Because could we learn the audio editing? Maybe. But like, are we gonna? Tough sell.
In this job market? No.
Yeah, tough sell. All right. So on a very high level, what exactly am I talking about here? So it's a common conundrum, I feel, for any GM in basically any game. I don't think this has any system specific thing. I think this can apply in every situation. Some information you want to be hidden for your players to discover, and some information you want to make sure the players definitely have. Right? On like a really basic, like no shit Sherlock kind of level, you generally tell the players what their character can see in a room, but you're not going to tell them that there are traps in the floor, right? Like, some information you will give out freely and some information you might not want to give out freely. Obviously, this sounds like a really simple concept, but the question often becomes, which information should be readily available and which information shouldn't be? It is inevitable that GMs will be running a scenario, whether it be a fight, a puzzle, or a general story conflict, that you're probably going to think to yourself, either I gave them too much or I gave them too little, and then you're going to debate what to do from there. So that pendulum is what I'm talking about. I gave them too much, I gave them too little. You want to be in the middle as much as humanly possible. That's the crux of it. And I was thinking about this recently because the boss fight we had in Fabula, not last session, but the session before, the Big Bear, which we talked about before, I was trying to deliver information to you guys as players, right? I'm speaking to Isaiah directly here. I was trying to give information to you guys as players and trying to tell you that the ability where the bear was putting you in the like water prison, you could turn that off basically. And I was trying to do that, but I kept describing how the bear was using the water from the stream next to him to put you in that prison. And I was hoping that one of you go, oh, he's pulling from the water. If we move him away, he might not be able to use it, right? That was my intention. Nobody groks that, however, at any point. So in that scenario, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, how could I have delivered a little bit more information or deliver the information a little more clearly so that one of you guys would have realized that?
I thought about this actually.
Okay.
Because when you had said that, in my head I was like, oh, I can see why you were trying that. I think the thing that confused the three of us is because this is one of the few times where I think a map is really helpful. You can sort of see the water and see like it becomes a physical object as opposed to just a descriptor for the bear's attacks. You know what I mean? But I think the thing that probably would have done it for me at least is when we were knocked off the bear, saying like, oh, well, you fell to the far side of the bear away from the water. And as the water tries to reach out for you, it gets weaker. Like it loses some of its strength. It can't reach as far. That may have been the thing that had it click for me.
Maybe. The only problem I see there is if I did that, then that would imply like a mechanical effect, like maybe it did less damage or something, and I didn't have anything like that. So if I did that, but it still did the same amount of damage, that still might be confusing, you know?
It could, yeah. And that's sort of what this whole thing's about, right? Is like,
yeah,
there is no set sweet spot for this thing. It really has to be a case-by-case basis.
Ultimately, probably as the fight was dragging on and nobody was grokking it, I probably should have been like, okay, players, I probably should have just told you on a player level, there's a way to disable this ability, right? And maybe not, I won't tell you the solution, but I'll be like, there's a way to turn this off, right? That probably, at a certain point, I probably should have just pulled the ripcord on that. And sometimes you just have to pull the ripcord in these scenarios because you had a plan for how you were going to deliver the information and it's not working and you're in the middle of session, so you don't necessarily have time to like reevaluate your plan. So sometimes you just pull the ripcord and say, I'm telling you on a player level, you could do something here, you know, or if it's really bad, just tell them the answer straight up. If you fucked up majorly, I can't think of a good example of that, but you know, if you're in a situation where you're like, oh, I gave them so little information, they have now completely screwed themselves. I need to just tell them because it's not there for, because ultimately, if players screw themselves and like get all their characters killed or something like that, if it was on them, if they had all the tools and then they go down, it's like, well, you know, I'm not necessarily feeling bad about that. If they get royally fucked and it's because I forgot to mention something that would have been majorly useful information, now I feel guilty, right? Like, oh, you were not working with a full deck. I can't blame you. Like, if I forget, you know, if you guys are fighting, you know, if the players are fighting a fire elemental that does a shitload of damage, but you could kill it really fast if you had, you know, ice damage, and I forget to mention that it's a fire element, like I just say elemental and I don't specify it's a fire elemental, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm gonna feel guilty about that because I'm like, oh, yeah, that would have been really useful information if I said it was a fire elemental specifically. So in a situation like that, and this wasn't quite that scenario, but I do think I could have pulled the ripcord a little bit and said, there is a way to disable this ability and then left it at that. I think that might have been worth it, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
So reinforcing my thesis point, this is why this is something that you constantly have to contend with when you're GMing, is because it's a difficult pendulum to, you know, the balance scales are difficult to keep even. But the question becomes, because someone might have this thought, why balance between the two at all? Why not just pick one or the other, right? Okay. So let's address that. Okay, so one end of the scale here could be, why not just tell them everything, right? So GMs might have, a GM might have the thought that the easy solution to this issue is to simply give all the players the information that you have behind the screen, like a board game, right? Or you just tell them the bad guys are doing X, Y, and Z. They have this ability or whatever. Of course, you could do this, but the main reason you don't want to do this mostly comes down to player satisfaction. If you tell the players the answer to the puzzles, always tell them what weakness the enemy has, or say exactly what the NPC's inner thoughts are, then the players have no information to try and pry from the narrative themselves. And if they don't get to figure out the problem themselves, they don't get to feel particularly smart and don't ever really feel satisfied, because the challenge is a big part of the fun. So like, yeah, you could just tell them, oh, this enemy's weak to ice and lightning, and it has this much HP, and this is his attack, and his attack uses these dice. Like, you could tell them all that, but then, it's not as satisfying to win the fight, because part of the assumption about the way RPGs are designed is that not all of that information is readily available. I mean, video games, this is true too, right? A lot of games like Monster Hunter, for example, the monster's health bar is hidden. And the reason for that is because it keeps you tense the entire time you're fighting the monster, because you're not entirely sure when it's going to go down. Like, you don't know exactly when it's going to die. You get little indicators, right? You get them to a certain point of health and they get hurt and they limp around, but you still don't have any exact numbers. So it's the same kind of idea. If you just tell them everything, it kills a lot of the satisfaction of overcoming the challenge. And also, it's really satisfying, and I can vouch for this very recently, because we're playing Fabula Ultima, which is a game that uses basically every enemy. That game has resistances and vulnerabilities. Like, almost no enemies in the game have none. So the players are constantly trying to fish for, okay, what's this guy weak to? And as soon as they find it, everyone immediately gets hyped. They're like, oh, okay, we found what he's weak to. All right, hit him, right? Like, as soon as they figured out the bear was weak to lightning, they hammered the shit out of him with lightning damage, and that immediately started to swing things in their favor. So, like, it's fun to figure it out, whereas if I just told them, obviously they would still get the mechanical benefit of the double damage, but it's not as fun if you didn't get to figure it out yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the other...
I think something funny about that for me, as someone who's played D&D for a long time and have had countless characters try to figure out vulnerabilities and resistances, only to just realize as I ran the game myself, those don't really exist conventionally in D&D on a large scale.
Yep.
That I did what I did with Django, right? Where I go, okay, well, this one character has a really weird damage type that no one's resistant to.
Yes, because...
I did that with Goro as well, and I should probably work myself out of that habit, because it is ultimately, I wouldn't say it's fucking us, but yeah, it's just one of those things.
Well, yeah, it's funny because you built a character who specifically ignores that mechanic, and now there are times where it's like, oh, you kind of wish you could use it.
Yeah. Because I'm like, I ignore the mechanic because I'm like, no, I just don't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, because in 5e, it's like the mechanic exists, but it's not utilized that much. And a lot of the time, even if an enemy does have a vulnerability or something like that, you're still probably better off just going for more reliable, consistent damage than trying to fish for the vulnerability. Mm-hmm. It's because of the way the math tends to work out, Like, yeah, you'll do double damage if you find out the enemy's weak to fire, but if you already do force damage, you're probably better off spending 3 turns doing consistent force damage than trying a bunch of other types of damage to eventually get to fire,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whereas, and I think part of the reason for that in 5e is because a lot of enemies just don't have a vulnerability. So, you just don't bother that much. And B, it's not as easy to have a bunch of different types of damage in 5e, right? Like, being able to pick from like, oh, I can do fire damage and I can do poison damage and I can do ice damage. That's actually kind of hard in that game. Whereas Fabula,
True.
You have all sorts of tools to whip out a ton of different damage types, and several of the classes have different options for how they can go about that. And even if you don't, you still have the elemental shards, which still let you do like 5 different damage types. right? You just don't get, I think you don't get poison, light, and dark from those crystals. So it's like, and everyone has those. So it's like, it's harder to fish for and not as worth it in 5e, and you don't have it as reliably as often. So what ends up happening? You just ignore it. Unless you know, right? That's the, if you're fighting the troll, you're like, well, we need fire damage, right? That's the few times it'll come up.
You know what's funny is I think Matt would have been a great person to have on this topic because of his opinions on, like, if you're a player and you personally have that information that trolls are weak to fire, you should not act on it.
Well,
I think we could have had some interesting debates with this topic specifically.
Well, part of this discussion,
it's the flip side to that, right?
Yeah, well, part of this whole thing is about meta knowledge and metagaming knowledge and stuff. And
exactly, yeah.
It's not really the main crux of it because I don't really have a great answer. But it is something to consider and that you have to keep in mind for sure. But talking about the two extremes of the scale here, on the other end, your other option is, why not tell them nothing at all, right? So on one hand, we have tell them just everything. On the other hand, just tell them nothing at all. This is much more common for GMs, especially new ones. They decide they're not going to tell their players jack shit, right? They go with the angle of making the players fish or find every bit of information they want and only give them the absolute bare minimum that is directly obvious / in front of the characters. Before I continue, Isaiah, do you know what the word diegetic means?
I couldn't tell you the exact definition of it, but I do understand roughly what the word means.
Okay, so diegetic, for anyone listening to, the diegetic means something that exists in the actual world of the medium. So, for example...
Oh, right. They talk about this with scoring in video games a lot, right? Like, yes. Diegetic is if the music is happening, it's context, right? It just sort of means it's narrative context.
The exact definition is occurring within the context of the story and able to be heard by the characters. So, for example, the cantina scene in Star Wars when they first arrive is diegetic music because the band is playing the song in the scene, right? So the music that the audience is hearing, the characters are also hearing. So that's diegetic. That's sweet, sweet jizz. When Luke stands on the dunes and looks out at the two suns and we hear the Force theme, that's non-diegetic music. Luke is not hearing that music, but we as the audience do hear that music. That's the difference, right? So in the context of tabletop RPGs, something that's diegetic means it's something the player characters are like interacting and exist within the context of their world. If it's non-diegetic, it means it's something that the players might know, but not necessarily their characters. So the reason I mention this, the GM who decides not to tell their enemy players, basically the decision is any information that is non-diegetic to the story, the GM will not give out freely, and the players can only find this information in character. So an example would be not telling the players that a troll is weak to fire. And if they do hit the troll with fire, you might narrate the troll reacting in pain, like extra in pain. And if the players don't understand that you're showing them it's a vulnerability to fire, then that's too bad. You're not going to tell them because vulnerability mechanics do not exist in the context of the story. So you simply will not say it's vulnerable to fire and takes double damage, right? Because you're trying to do everything diegetically. So you're not going to say it's taking double damage because that's not diegetic to the characters. The problem here, of course, comes down to how the medium of tabletop is played, right? Tabletop RPGs are played in our imaginations in a shared headspace where we convey information back and forth through conversation. There is minimal to no visual information and very little other context that would be there in something like a video game or a movie or a show. So this means that miscommunication and misunderstanding is commonplace in tabletop games. So you have to contend with that as a GM. So using the troll example, it might be obvious to you as the GM that you're describing fire vulnerability when the troll gets hit, but another player might think you're saying that the troll was sent into a state of rage because of the fire and thus decides not to use fire again. So they get the complete wrong message. Also worth noting that when you as the GM have information in front of you, it is really easy to assume the players will get what you mean, but they don't have the information you do, so they might assume incorrectly. Much like my players did with the big bear, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, if you tell the players nothing and force them to do everything in character via only diegetic information, you can run into a lot of issues, like where effectively they're going to be playing on the back foot. Now, the example I gave of like the players misinterpreting the troll weakness and choosing to not use fire because they think it's actually like a buff for the troll. The GM might think that's fine, right? The GM might be like, well, that's okay. If that's how they react, that's how they react. Like, that's how I want to run the game. That's fine. But you have to contend with that. You know, you have to keep that in mind. Much like the GM who tells the players everything, they might be okay with the fact that their players aren't quite as satisfied because they're not like discovering stuff as much on their own, but they might be okay with that. But you still have to contend with it and think about it and keep it in mind.
Now, which side do you lean on more than the other?
Probably
like surely you understand that both are necessary, but which one do you personally think that you
I generally most of this is the thing too, and I'll get to this later. A lot of this is very game specific in terms of like style of game. My default position is I will lean towards the I ain't gonna tell them shit position a little bit more, but I won't go out of my way to obscure the information. So, like, if the players hit the troll with fire and I describe the troll as like in pain and like clearly bothered by the fire, and then a player goes, oh, he's weak to fire, I will say, yes, he's weak to fire, right? Like, I let them discover it. I didn't tell them the troll was weak to fire ahead of time. I let them discover it. And then once they ask to confirm, I will confirm, yes, it is, right? So I won't immediately give the information, but I'm not overly cagey with the information.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So we seem to be on opposite sides because I am someone who was more typical to give my players information. So in the context of the troll situation, right, I would also describe the troll maybe starts howling, maybe starts panicking specifically, like using a very coded word, panicking. And after I describe it and, you know, the players are on the edge of their seats, you go, I do this. I love doing this. It was more effective than you expected because that every single time gets players like, let's fucking go.
I mean, I will do that sometimes too. It depends. Like, if it's just like, I don't know. I do both, I guess, because I will just say, like, when we're playing Fabula, I will say, like, yeah, he took double damage, right? Like, I will just say that. So, like, it kind of depends. Basically, I try to be upfront. I'm not delivering the information, but once it's out there, I'm not being overly cagey because I don't generally feel like it's worth it, you know? Whereas, because some GMs will describe the troll thing, and then the player will be like, okay, so is he weak to fire? And then the GM will be like, you don't know. I'm just telling you how he reacted, right? I don't really like doing that.
No, that I find fucking infuriating.
Yeah, I don't really love doing that. I understand the urge to do it, but most of the time I'm like, eh. Or like another great example is armor class, right? I'm not going to tell you the armor class, but if y'all are paying attention, you could just figure it out. And I'm not going to go out of my way to hide it. You know what I mean? Like, yes, I'm not going to try and obscure it any extra. I'm just going to let you math it out.
Yes. For me, when it's AC, if I know that the players, you know, it's like, oh, I rolled a 14, that misses. Okay, I rolled a 15, that hits. Okay, I rolled a 16, that hits. Then I'll be like, well, okay, so it's AC's 15, because at that point they know, right? Like, they have to be actively not paying attention, and I'm not gonna fault somebody for, like, you know, having stepped away for a second or was distracted. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna expect people that they're gonna be clocked in 100% of the time, so I'll just tell them.
Well, the only reason I don't usually say is because I think there's a little bit of an element of the fun of the players sharing that information with each other and figuring it out, right? I distinctly remember when we were playing 5e, almost every time without fail, Sam would figure out the AC because he would be like, because he would track the hits, and then a round or two would go by and he'd go, okay, this is the AC, guys, right? And he would tell you, and I think that was an element of fun for Sam to be that person tracking the math. You know what I mean?
For sure, yeah.
So in that context, I just let him I could tell him or he could say it. It's the same outcome, but I let the players do it because I think there is that element of like, okay, we figured it out, Yeah. It also keeps everyone a little like paying attention a little bit more, and it's just like a camaraderie, like teamwork kind of vibe. In the same way that playing Fabula, you track a lot of the enemy's health a lot of the time, right? Like, or at least you'll roughly be like, you'll be like, we did about this much damage. And then when I
keep tally of my damage because I that one's funny because I understand my role in this party is DPS. I'm playing 14 Samurai. What's your functionality? Well, my damage is my functionality.
My damage is my function. But what you do is you'll be like, okay, I'm tracking the damage, and then when I say the enemy's in crisis, you go, okay, we did this much damage. He went into crisis. He has this much health left, right? Like, and you deliver all that information to the group. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of an element of fun too to like let the players kind of take that time and parse it. Yeah. Okay. So where was I? All right. So now I'm just gonna go through a couple of different tips and tricks / scenarios where scenarios isn't the right word. The context where this kind of thing comes up a lot, I guess, is the easiest way to put it. So the most simple manifestation of this issue is delivering story and plot information, right? Story and plot, generally, you're going to do pretty diegetically. The characters and the players have as much information as makes sense for them to have in terms of what they have seen and gathered and who they talk to and yada yada. This can change a little bit if you have a mechanic or a narrative reason for players to know more than their characters. So the obvious example that we're using right now, Fabula Ultima has the GM scenes, which is very specifically giving information to the players that their characters do not have in a non-diegetic fashion, because the GM scene is you're narrating a scene to the players that their characters don't see, only the players do. Now, doing it that way, obviously, you're going to have to finesse it a little bit more in terms of how much information you want to give up, but you generally want to err on the side of, at least in my opinion, you generally want to err on the side of the players know something is up, but don't have a solution to the problem, right? So you might narrate the GM scene and a character who is, the bad guy shows up in the GM scene. So the players know who the bad guy is, but that doesn't mean they can stop their plan, right? They're just like, okay, we know who the problem is. Now we have to figure out how to deal with them. Most games, though, most of the time, most games and most GMs generally will tell the players what the characters logically know in a diegetic fashion, so this won't be that big of an issue in terms of the disconnect. But again, it varies game by game.
It really does, and I'm experiencing this right now with Lancer, right?
Yeah,
because you get into a whole different realm of diegetic information when characters have access to the fucking internet.
Yeah,
there's a lot of things that I didn't share in Hellscapes or like kinds of topics that I wouldn't typically give them in Hellscapes, but I am giving them in Lancer, because a character who is a computer nerd and spends 90% of her time on the OmniNet would probably have come across some weird like information that most people wouldn't know, right? Like if you're someone who's deeply ingrained in the military industrial complex, you're going to know certain callouts or certain maneuvers or certain mechs or ideas that you wouldn't otherwise. A good example of that, I think, was this was in Hellscapes actually, but this was halfway through our campaign. They had the big bandit war thing, which they technically lost. They beat they lost the battle but won the war. They were pushed off by the bandits. And the military, like actual military faction, were like, yeah, so we're engaging a collapsing retreat. You might want to, figure that out. And, you as Josh might not know what the fuck that means. And a lot of players, their characters wouldn't know what the fuck that means. But Brett's character, who was a soldier from that faction, would know that a collapsing retreat is you get the fuck out and then bomb where you were just standing so they can't follow you. And if the players are like, oh, so you mean talking about the ground that we're standing on is about to become a crater? Okay, good to know.
Yeah, I will say though, the internet thing you're talking about, that is still relatively in the realm of diegetic, mostly because the character is doing the like surfing the net. Where it will start to shift into the non-diegetic realm is where you as the GM are delivering like extra information, right? Because like it's that thing in the movie scene where the main character or like the hacker guy who works on the main character's team finds out like top secret information from the government or something, and you're like, what the fuck? And it is diegetic in the sense that he took the time in the scene to get the information, but it feels like the director, it's like you feel the hand of the director delivering the information, right?
You like, do, but I think in that situation, kind of what I was saying, right? When a character spends all their time on like the deep web, right? Or that you are like a hacker by profession, and especially if you've done so I'm thinking of Snubby's character, right? She was a government contracted like hacker lancer.
Yeah.
So when it comes to certain factions, I just give her information because I know that her character would likely have been doing some snooping when she absolutely should not have been.
Yeah.
I'll just give her that for free.
That's what I'm saying. It does make sense in a diegetic fashion. Like, it does make sense that the character could potentially get that information. I'm just saying it shifts into the out of character non-diegetic realm a little bit because it's almost one of those things where it's like you as the GM are hand delivering the information to the character in a weird way because it's really specific and it's really valuable information, and you could be like, when did the character have time to look that up? How did they not get in trouble? But you don't really worry about that, right? So it like teeters between the two positions a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
It's kind of a funny, it's almost like a third position scenario. Like, it makes sense in character to a point.
Yeah.
But it's not a full-blown GM scene, but it's like the kind of information you might get from a GM scene too, But no, it is definitely for sure. Anytime you have that level of potential information to acquire, it's like, yeah, it's kind of like that thing too, where if you're playing a game like Blades or something, and your character goes out and talks to a bunch of people to try and figure out like where the target is or whatever, and they conveniently happen to find the exact person who knows the exact answer to the exact problem, and you're kind of like, well, it is in character and makes sense to a point, but the information's so specific, you're like, it's a little much maybe, but sure, I'll buy it. You know what I mean?
Well, so I'll tell you what, we actually had that exact thing happen in Blades for us. I remember this specifically because my character, I was the character who was always looking up public records and shit. And I remember the Red Sashes guy came up to me because I was like, like this is when we were going into the underground fight club, right? When Aster summoned a bunch of demons when he committed war crimes. Ghost, yeah. And you were like, oh, this red sash guy comes up to you and gives you some like esoteric information. And I was like, and I know the red sashes are coming after us, right? And you're like, yes, you do. So I was like, all right, cool.
Yeah. Right. It's like, it is diegetic. It does make sense. It's in character, but it is like, convenient.
yeah, for sure.
But sometimes that's just the best way to do it, right? Like, that is often like marrying the two together sometimes just makes the most sense. It's just the easiest way. So still staying within the realm of like the general narrative and story of the game, what about dealing with NPCs? So obviously information on NPCs is related to the story, right? Duh. And again, you can handle this in terms of what your characters know about what your players and their characters know about NPCs. You can handle this in a mostly diegetic fashion, but sometimes you will have to kind of decide if it makes sense to give more than that. And what I mean, the classic example is the insight check in D&D 5e, right? Because
I was hoping you were going to bring this up because this is something that
because the insight check mechanic does exist diegetically in that the player character is, observing the NPC, right? So it does exist in the context of the characters, but it kind of gives you this out of character level of information, the classic he's lying situation, right? And now as the GM, if you want to try and push this, like, because the whole thing where it's like the GM tells you for sure this NPC is lying to you, that is definitely 100% non-diegetic, because the GM is giving you 100% concrete information that your character could never actually have 100% concretely like that, barring like magic, obviously. So,
okay, do you know who is great at this? Cardell.
Okay.
At providing information like this. I'm going to tell you exactly how. Well, I would play with Cardell in person, right? Like, our games were held over the internet, but we'd play in person. Yeah, and I think he solved this perfectly. I'm sorry, I know this is a tangent.
No. Well, it might layer over with the next chunk of my note too, but keep going.
Go on. Yeah.
No.
You sure?
No. It might be better if you say this first. I'm thinking.
Well, so most people can't do this unless you're playing in person. To be clear.
Okay.
But when characters would people tell us when characters would lie.
People do still play in person. I know that's hard to believe.
I know. He wouldn't tell us when characters would lie, but he was really good about giving NPCs
body
little
language.
tells.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So good. Like, there was, oh God, who was, this is like 6 years ago, but there was a character where he was like such a smarmy little shit. And I remember he lied once, and he did this thing where he like cocked his chin to the side. Like, I don't know how I can, like, it's like the O thing, but like he would like bring his chin over every time he would say something. And I was like, I thought it was just a behavior. I thought it was like a quirk of the character. But at one point I said something that spooked the character. Right? Okay. Like I was like, oh, I have this info. And he was like, I wouldn't know anything about that. And he like turned his head to the side again. And I was like, wait.
Okay. Yeah, so he was slowly but surely
Pavloving the shit out of me.
yeah. Right. Yeah. She was like training you on the information, which that's basically layers with what I was about to say. Because what I was the next bit I was saying is, like, as the GM, you can try to handle the insight check in a diegetic fashion by saying things like, he's sweating profusely. You notice he's tapping his hand nervously, right? Which is essentially what you're saying Cardell is doing. The problem is, of course, that all humans have very different body language, and those different elements of body language can change, especially when you're talking like across cultures. So when it comes to using a mechanic that the book is saying gives the player direct information, you're almost always better off delivering that information non-diegetically and directly to the player so that it is clear and gives the player what they earned. But like you were just saying, there is a way you can kind of thread that needle if you want, but it's hard. And
it is. It's really difficult. And I think, to Chris's credit, and maybe a little bit discredit, I don't know that he was doing it specifically for me. Because I do this where I will give NPCs specific body language, and I know that the player can't see them.
Right.
But
it just helps you stay in character.
It helps me stay in character.
Yes,
so it's possible that was just a tick he had for that character. And I could be talking out of my ass. This could be the most amazing fortuitous circumstance event. But assuming, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that it wasn't. It was like a tailored thing he was doing either for himself or for us.
Yeah.
And it was really effective.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter either if it was 100% planned or not because it worked, right? But yeah, something like the insight check is, it's an eternal debate, right? You can hear and go listen to any tabletop podcast or video or anything. It always comes up like, should insight be a lie detector? How much should you tell them, right? All that shit. You just got to decide as a GM and with the style of game you're playing, do you care enough to try and make it more complicated, or are you okay with just letting it deliver the information just as is? And me personally, if the characters have an ability or a mechanic or something like that gives them information and it says, this information has to be delivered in, this information has to be delivered in such a way that the player knows for sure, then I'm generally going to say, just do it. You know what I mean?
Let me ask you, how do you typically handle insight checks? Because you were sort of talking about how, should you or should you not? How do you personally handle it?
I think I mostly just let him be a lie detector. I mean, I'm not generally running the kind of game where it being something else is worth the time, really. You know what I mean? Like, if you're running the Apothecary's Diary RPG and
I play that,
characters lying and finagling with each other and trying to get a better position in the court or whatever, then the insight check being a lie detector is going to ruin some of the fun, right? Because the courtly back and forth is the combat, as it were, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm running that kind of game, then yes, I'm not going to so much allow insight check as lie detector because the game is more focused on that, so we're going to spend more time on that. If I'm running the monster, if I'm running the dungeon fucking monster slapping game, I don't really care if insight just tells you the goblin's lying, like,
right.
It's fine. You pass the check. And some games will tell you directly. So like Apocalypse World, for example, has a couple abilities where it's like, or a couple of moves where it says, the character knows this, the GM must tell you truthfully, right? Like the game explicitly says you have to tell them. And in that scenario, the game is like, do not try to do this as some sort of in-character shit. Deliver this as a non-diegetic bit of information that they have, end of discussion, right? So in those scenarios, I defer to what the game wants me to do. And for Apocalypse World, that particular idea of the characters have moves that are just like, GM, deliver me this information, that makes sense for that game because a lot of the time the tension in Apocalypse World is I know this character's going to screw me over, and now I have to figure out how to deal with it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you just don't know what anybody's doing and they're just milling about, then the tension's not as much there. But if you know, oh, Jim is trying to fuck me, I need to make fuck me over. I need to make sure that I'm like out of his way because he's about to cause trouble. Like, that is the tension of that game. So yeah, most of the time insight check, like I don't know if you remember, but I think for the Beyond the Gods game, I mostly just let insight be a lie detector for the most part.
Like recognizing a pattern and knowing your intent, though, I just kind of wanted to.
Yeah. For the most part, I'm not too worried. I do try to describe it a little. What I'll do is I'll give the player the non-diegetic information and then describe why the character knows that in the scene diegetically, right? Like, I'll be like, he's lying to you because, he's sweating a lot and he keeps grabbing his arm and he's not making eye contact with you, right? Like, I'll give you the info and then describe it and make it make sense usually. Mm-hmm. Because what I don't love is the feeling of make check, character suddenly knows information for no discernible reason. I don't love that. So I do try to like make it make sense in the story somehow. You know what I mean?
100%. No, my typical tactic is not a lie detector. It's you can, again, they could have, in my head, I'd like to think that they could have figured the tells out if we were in person, but I will just at that point tell them what that character's tells are. So if a character taps their fingers and you're starting to get them on the back foot, they might tap faster or stop tapping, or maybe they are sweating, or they're clenching their teeth or flaring their nostrils, anything like that.
Yeah. Another way to deal with it. I mean, yeah, this is one of those funny ones. I don't think anyone's ever going to really have an answer. Ultimately, it just depends on how you want to handle it. Case by case.
It depends on the medium in which you're playing, right? If you're at a table, you can do so much more than you could online.
Right, yeah. Actual physical body language, you could do a lot of potential weirdness, for sure. And now we have the one that I probably have the least to say or do anything with, which dealing with puzzles and how much information to give or not give on puzzles. So puzzles are probably the most divisive element of RPGs in terms of how much information should the players have or not, right? Usually the way most people go about it, I think, is that the puzzle gets introduced to everyone, in character, and then everyone immediately goes out of character and begins to solve the puzzle in a non-diegetic fashion, and then once the solution is found, everyone switches back into character and then describes themselves doing it in a diegetic fashion. Mm-hmm. Right? That's usually how the puzzle situation goes. Most of the time, people are fine doing it that way. Like solve the thing in person as a player, and then just describe your character doing it. Usually no biggie. And some people actually think that's fun, especially if you're playing in person and you can hand out physical toys or something that are related to the puzzle, pieces of paper that have symbols on them or shit like that.
Oh, I love me some peripherals.
Yeah, so that can be fun. The problem, though, that often comes up, you always have the one character or the one player who's probably playing something like a wizard and says, well, my character's a lot smarter than me. What can they figure this out? Or what can they figure out for this puzzle? And to this problem, I do not have a good solution. Some people will say the character should be able to just give the player some degree of a solution. Like, yes, you're playing the wizard, so the GM will just tell the wizard player like X, Y, and Z information. but then other people will say that defeats the entire point of having a puzzle in your game at all. So the best I can usually say about it is give that wizard player some kind of a hint or a nudge that pushes them in the right direction, and that generally makes the player happy that their in-character choice was recognized. Because ultimately, the reason that this usually comes up is because someone's playing the wizard character. They want the game and the game master to acknowledge the fact that they're playing a wizard, right? That feels good because you made a choice about which class you're playing. So it feels good if that's acknowledged. So I generally say, give them a little hint, give them a little extra information as the wizard character, and then they're usually happy. Don't necessarily solve it for them, though, because I feel like that definitely is kind of defeating the point,
Absolutely, yeah. And hello, me. I'm usually the wizard player. Or at least playing the character with the 20 HP or 20 intelligence, even though I know it's arguably the worst stat in the game. But yeah, no, I just want hints. Like, if you're looking at like I don't know, some sort of like logic puzzle, you can tell me, you're like, oh, it's about permutations and computations. And I go, oh, okay. So I know what direction to think about this.
Yeah, you can start moving in a direction. Yeah. It's the same thing of like when you're playing a video game like Baldur's Gate 3, right? Like an RPG of that nature, you're playing Mass Effect. And then the game acknowledges one of the character creation choices you made. Like the game acknowledges you're playing a bard, or the game acknowledges that you're the shepherd you chose is from Earth, right? Used to live on Earth. Like that, the game like paying attention to your choice, even if it's a little stupid thing, like an extra line of dialogue that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise, it still makes you happy. You know what I mean?
Oh, I live for that shit.
Yeah, like even in like Final Fantasy 14, which is an MMO and has absolutely no, like, you can't control them, you can't affect the narrative in any fashion. But every once in a while, the game will acknowledge something about your character. So, like, there's certain quests where if you're playing a healer, the game will, mention the fact, like, a character will say in dialogue, like, oh, I know you're a healer, but we need you to do something else right now. Like, they'll point out that fact. Or, like, another good example is, there's an event that happens. I won't get too specific because spoilers, but there's a thing that happens in Shadowbringers where a character shows up, and if you did the quest chain where you met that character and actually did that, would know who that is, you get an extra dialogue option that you can call out their name and say who it is. If you didn't do that quest chain, you don't have that little dialogue option. So it's literally just, it's like that kind of a thing. That little bit of acknowledgement, it goes a long way.
Absolutely.
Then from puzzles we go to the big doozy. I feel, in my opinion, combat. Right. I feel like combat is the most common element of constant back and forth between player and GM information is the combat. Assuming your game is combat focused, obviously. Substitute combat for whatever the main focus of your game is, right? In D&D, it's combat, but if you're playing like Burning Wheel, it might not be. But whatever that main central pillar mechanic is, or central pillar thing that you do in the game. This is where combat is generally where you get the accusations of metagaming and arguments between players that can crop up because of the classic, well, your character wouldn't know that line, right? Your character wouldn't know the troll's weak to fire. Generally, this kind of thing ends up being up to the GM on a very case-by-case basis of how much information you're willing to give up. Some GMs will just tell the players the DC of every check and the AC of every monster with no questions and not care. Others won't tell the players necessarily, but they won't go out of their way to obscure the information either. And then others still will do everything in their power to keep that information as hidden as humanly possible. So it's very much a spectrum of how you can handle this one. And again, it's where a lot of the arguments are going to come up. So to break it into, like, I broke up the combat thing to like 3 main chunks. So when it comes to like stats, right? This is a very common one. The stats of the enemy, stuff like AC and HP, right? Or whatever the equivalent in your game is. You know, most GMs will lean in the direction of not saying these things outright, right? Most GMs will not say the boss has 200 HP. But, you know, in effort, I should say, each of these bullet points I'm giving each of these chunks, I'm giving kind of the pros and cons of the two sides. If you want your game to be like a little more relaxed and not necessarily a test of the players or a test for the players, then telling the players how much HP the enemy has, how much AC they have, you know, how many spell slots they have left, telling them stuff like that can make things a little easier and offload the amount of info you as the GM are keeping straight in your head and just make it transparent to the players. That will make your game a little more like casual, you know, a little more chill. Obviously, the con here being you lose out on, you know, the air of mystery, the feeling of discovery, the reward of solving the combat puzzle, right? The thing I was saying in the beginning of that satisfaction of figuring out, you know, you kind of miss out on that. Obviously, on the other side, the other extreme of hiding the information as much as possible, you can have the satisfaction, but you can also very much have frustration. So, and you know, if you say to your players, this campaign's going to be a little more like hardcore, or I'm going to make things more difficult, then the idea of playing a lot more information closer to the chest is an acceptable thing if everyone agreed to it. But when the players get pissed off because they can't figure out how to, you know, turn off the boss's invulnerability armor, then, you know, you got to sit with that frustration and accept it because that's what you told them and that's what you agreed to, right?
To a point, yeah. I mean, I think
to a point, always to a point.
there is this sort of, I've seen this opinion before, especially when it comes to things, not exactly a hardcore mode, but like, you know, like I told my players I wasn't going to hold their hand and they can't figure it out and they got mad at me because I wouldn't give them any hints. I think as a GM, especially when it comes to information transfer, you always need to have a point of compromise. I think this is very important.
Yeah.
Like, it can be a far point, but I've definitely seen people just be like, no, I told them this thing and I'm not going to do it. And it's like, all right, but you are creating a less enjoyable product overall. Not even a product. You're creating a less enjoyable atmosphere to hold true to a value that you clearly have, I don't want to say failed, but like misjudged on some level. So always be willing to compromise, but you know, you can set your that level. It's a sliding scale. You can set it wherever you want. Just make sure you have it.
Yeah, it's a sliding scale, and I think ultimately what you're kind of saying is be willing to slide it back, right? Be willing to slide it forward and back.
Yes, you absolutely need to be willing to adjust it on the fly. Absolutely.
Yeah, and there is, because at a certain point, even if you do want to do the hardcore game and all the players agreed, there might still come kind of a breaking point where it's like, all right, fuck, we're just getting to the point of this is miserable and annoying. Like, can we figure something out here? And that's kind of the ripcord pull to a certain degree, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a full blown pull the ripcord. It could just be, you know, the GM going, all right, let me adjust a little bit. I'll tell you this bit of information or something like that. Next little other big chunk of other big thing you might want to, or not might want to, but might be dealing with in terms of combat information is what we were talking about last week, secondary objectives, right? when you're dealing with something like a secondary objective, you can, of course, just tell the players outright what the objective is, right? You have to break the thing, or you have to survive a number of rounds. Or you can hint at what the objective is without saying it outright. The pros and cons here being pretty similar to the previous one when we're talking about stats, where the key difference being if the players can't figure out what they need to do for the secondary objective, that could potentially bring the game to a grinding halt, right? If the secondary objective, if they're fighting a Lich who has a, invulnerable shield around him, and the secondary objective is that they need to go to the four corners of the room and like deactivate the magic runes in the lair, if they don't realize that, everything will come to a screeching halt because they can't hurt the Lich. So that can be a pretty big con if you hold back too much information, right? Conversely, though, if you tell them exactly what they need to do, they might just blast through the fight and make it way easier than you intended, right? If you were expecting the Lich to be invulnerable for like 3 rounds and be able to output some damage without taking any damage for 3 rounds, and then the players just solve the puzzle in 1 round, the fight's probably going to be a lot easier than you were planning on it being. And that might be a little lame and disappointing, especially if the Lich is supposed to be like an end of adventure boss, right? So it's kind of it's similar to the stats information in terms of like, the mystery and the puzzle solving and the discovery feeling and all that. But also be careful because the objective can just potentially ruin things if you don't dance around it the right amount.
Mm-hmm. Speaking from experience on this one.
Oh yeah.
Me, not you.
I mean, I am too. I've definitely done a similar thing. I think every GM has done that where they're like, oh, I'm going to make them, the fight is going to involve doing something other than just hitting the boss. And then the players don't figure it out. And you're like, oh, the
that's
boss
kind of a good
just
point.
Beat their ass. Like
every GM has done this. And if you say you haven't, you're lying.
Probably. Yeah, because it's like it's also comes back to that thing where when you have an idea in your head, right, you're like, oh, this will make sense, right? I'll describe the runes on the wall in the 4 corners or whatever, blah blah blah, like this will make sense. And then you describe it to the players, and for whatever reason to them it's not quite as clear as it was in your mind, and then they're confused. And usually if they get confused and make no progress for a while, like let's say it's 3 rounds and they weren't able to make any progress, that's probably like an hour and a half in real life of time. They're probably going to get frustrated. And as they're getting frustrated, they're probably less likely to solve the puzzle.
Yeah, they'll just start engaging with it less and less.
Yeah, like as you get more frustrated, your chance of figuring it out decreases, it does not increase. So you definitely got to watch out for tipping too far. Like the secondary objective thing, I think, is when you're dealing with combat, is the thing that you want to teeter in the middle as much as humanly possible. Like teeter in the middle more than a lot of even the other points I've made, because it can get really out of whack if it goes too far one way or the other.
Extremely.
Yeah. And again, and like I was just saying with the bear thing, right? I thought describing the bear using the water from the stream nearby would be a clear indicator, but my players did not agree, And so in that situation, I was like, shit.
GM instructions unclear, dick caught in toaster.
Yeah, right. You don't want to catch your player's dick in a toaster. That's unfortunate. That's bad.
Yeah, not fun.
Even if they don't have a dick, you still don't want them to get it caught in a toaster. And then, of course, a last really big one that you have to deal with when it comes to combat, and this one comes up a lot, I feel like, is enemy strengths and weaknesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best way to decide how you're going to handle this particular element of, players fighting monsters or whatever is really decide based on your style of game. Because if you're playing like the Men in Black or Witcher style game where you have to figure out what the monster is doing so that you can stop them, then you generally want to make the players really work for it in character, diegetically, to get the information they need to stop the enemy, because that is that's the style of game. That's the theme you're going for. If you're playing the Witchers, then you want to have that moment of like, I know it's a necrophage, so I need necrophage oil, right? Like that's part of the fun. If your game is a little more in the realm of like an epic quest narrative of great heroes traveling from one point to the other or something like that, being a little more upfront with the strengths and weaknesses of monsters can help to keep the pace moving and not slow things down with enemy encounters. Because the whole point of the game is like, we're traveling to Mordor, and then you get stuck on fighting some goobers for like 3 hours. That can kind of kill the we're going on a traveling like journey vibe, right? Like the pace of it. So in that scenario, the players encounter the goblins, maybe they fight for a round or two, and then you as the GM just kind of tell them like, oh, they're weak to this or whatever. The rules of your game, like whatever game you're playing, your game of choice, will also probably help you to make a decision on where to sit on this particular pendulum. Because a very combat-heavy game will probably expect the players to fish for information to give them an edge, right? And the game probably will even give the players the abilities to do so. Thus, you as the GM don't need to hand that information out. A good example, in Fabula, there's quite a few mechanics that the players can use as abilities that tell them like the stats and information on a monster. So me as the GM, I don't want to just readily hand that out every time they engage a new monster, because that totally invalidates those abilities. And we have one player who is playing a floralist, and one of the flowers she chose is explicitly for doing that. So if I just started giving that information out, I would just completely invalidate her ability choice and just make it a complete waste, which is obviously not what you want to do. But on the flip side, though, if you're playing a game that's really like social intrigue heavy, the game could expect you as the GM very explicitly to inform the players of specific details, especially if it's something like a courtly drama where the players don't know the rules, but their characters definitely would know the rules. So you have to tell them in a very straightforward fashion, because otherwise you don't really have a game. So going back to the Apothecary's Diaries example, if you're playing the Apothecary Diaries tabletop game, you probably have to explain to your players how the like hierarchy works in the rear palace, because their characters would know that. And if they start playing and their characters commit a bunch of faux pas, the game is just going to end instantaneously, because their character will just get like thrown in jail or executed because they did something wrong that they didn't realize they weren't supposed to do. Right. So there's a degree of information. You can't
flirt with the head courtesan. That's a...
Yeah. So like there's a degree of upfront information that the players are going to need to be able to like play correctly. So that's, again, it's that dance of what kind of information do they need to function, and what kind of information does the game expect them to fish for. That will help you decide on delivering the information in terms of enemy strengths and weaknesses. And again, important point when I say enemy just means someone opposing you, right? In the courtly intrigue game, the enemy is just that other bitch I don't like down the street, right? So yeah, style of game, and then literally the mechanics of the game or how you want to kind of balance that out. And then, you know, at some point, if you decide to just override the game and be like, well, I know we said we're playing this style of game and we're playing this RPG, but for this session, we're just going to like ignore some of that just to move past this bit and speed up. Cause you know, we were doing this bit about like finding this werewolf in the forest, but it's going on too long. It's getting annoying. So I'm just going to like speed up some of the information, tell you how to find the werewolf and tell you what he's weak to and be done with it. You know what I mean? There can also be that element to it. Anything to add?
No, I mean, I'm pretty much on the same page, yeah.
Train of thought. Choo-choo, go bye-bye. Oh no. Yeah, it's basically, to summarize, that's the last point. That was my last major bullet. To summarize the whole episode in general, ultimately, the decision or decisions, really, it's more than one. The decisions of how much to tell the players versus what to not tell them. Basically, you want to constantly be updating and stay on your toes. Right? You want to make sure you're constantly going back and checking. You're like, okay, I said we're going to do this, but in this scenario, it's probably better if I do that. And just keep that in the back of your mind. And ultimately, if the game is coming to a point where the method that you're using, whether it be handing out too much information or not enough, is starting to make things boring or annoying, then just pull the ripcord, flip to the other side, and then once the session's over, you know, reassess what you might want to do. Right? Because ultimately, having annoyed players or bored players, shit sucks.
It sucks
big donkey dicks.
It's not something you can ignore, right? You don't just have bored players. Like, the second players stop engaging, you know, and you feel it, and it's soul crushing.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody about this. I feel like it's almost impossible to not notice when you've hit that point where the game is just no momentum, everyone's bored, nobody's having it. Like, I feel like it's really hard not to notice as a GM, you know?
No, you have to be actively pretending it's not happening to not see it.
100%. Pretending or just really not giving a shit and being like intentionally oblivious almost.
Yeah, you're doing there's no way they wouldn't like my game. Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's kind of funny because I feel like on a micro scale, it's the your character wouldn't know the troll is weak to fire, right? That's the micro version. But on a macro scale, it's the like, no, your characters can't have that information, and the players are like, well, we don't know what else to do at this point, and you're like, tough. You know, like,
that's a level of just like zero self-awareness that I know must exist, but
it definitely exists.
You almost want to be like, surely not. Surely you'd get
it. I'm not really making any kind of point. It's just funny because I see it happen in degrees, and I'm just like, god damn it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that has been us. I never know how to round out my point completely. I need to start like writing a conclusion paragraph or something.
It is always kind of hard. Like, there's a reason why the OSP crew are just like, bye, and then they just leave.
Yeah, it really, because like you expound all the thoughts. You're like, okay. It's the same thing like when you're in school and you were writing the essay and you did a blah 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 blah, and you're like, oh fuck, I gotta write the conclusion. Like, it's that same energy. Anyway, that has been us. If you like what you heard, follow or subscribe. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Peace, motherfuckers.